The Galactic Council had erased the sector from every navigational archive 3 million cycles ago. Not quarantined, not restricted. Erased. No trade routes passed near it. No probes were sent. Even automated mapping drones had standing orders to alter course long before approaching its coordinates. Officially, the region didn't exist. Unofficially, it was called the Silent Boundary. And nothing that crossed it had ever returned. So when the first signal appeared, it didn't trigger curiosity. It triggered fear. The council chamber, an immense sphere of floating platforms and shifting light, fell into an unnatural stillness. Representatives from 1,000 species froze mid-motion as the transmission pulsed at the center of the room, unstable, raw, and impossibly clear. "Origin?" Elder Viral asked, his voice steady but low. A junior analyst hesitated before responding. "Confirmed, Elder, it's coming from inside the Silent Boundary." That single sentence rippled through the chamber like a shockwave. "That's not possible. Nothing exists there. It's a ghost signal, some kind of echo." But the analyst shook her head, her expression pale. "No, it's live, real-time, and it's directed." Directed, Viral's tendrils tightened slightly. "At whom?" The analyst swallowed. "At us." Silence returned, deeper this time. "Replay it," Viral ordered. The hologram stabilized. At first there was only static, dense, crackling interference that distorted both light and sound. Then slowly the distortion peeled back. A figure emerged. Human. There was no mistaking it. Bipedal stance, forward-facing eyes, minimal environmental gear, no visible weapons, no insignia. Just a single individual, standing against a backdrop of stars. But something about the image was wrong. The stars didn't move. They didn't flicker or shift like natural space. They watched. The human's gaze locked forward, as if staring directly into the council chamber itself. Then they spoke. "This is the United Earth Fleet." The translation systems activated instantly, struggling for a fraction of a second before locking into place. The voice was calm, controlled, not aggressive, but not uncertain either. "You are entering restricted space." Murmurs erupted across the chamber. "Humans," one delegate whispered sharply. "They were classified as pre-expansion only centuries ago." "They were observed," another snapped. "Fragmented, politically unstable, technologically limited." "Then how are they broadcasting from there?" No one answered. Because no one could. The human continued. "Identify yourselves or leave immediately." No demand. No escalation. Just a statement. And yet it carried a weight that pressed against every mind in the chamber. Viral leaned forward, enhanced the background. The hologram shifted, zooming outward past the human figure. For a moment, nothing changed. Then, the stars moved. Not drifting. Not rotating. Separating. Gasps filled the chamber as the illusion broke apart. What they had thought were distant stars were actually lights. Organized. Structured. Layered across an enormous surface. The scale didn't make sense. It refused to make sense. "Pull full-spectrum analysis," Viral commanded. Data flooded in. Mass readings spiked violently. Energy signatures flared beyond measurable limits. Gravitational distortions bent sensor projections into impossible shapes. The analysts froze as the results finalized. "This isn't a vessel," one of them said slowly, their voice barely holding together. "It's too large." "Then what is it?" someone demanded. The answer came as the image clarified further. Continents of metal. Vast interconnected structures stretching across thousands of kilometers. Rotating rings, each one housing what appeared to be entire ecosystems. Atmospheric layers. Energy conduits pulsing like veins beneath a metallic skin. And movement. Countless points of movement. Cities. Traffic. Life. The analyst's voice trembled. "It's a world." The chamber fell completely silent. Because worlds didn't move. Worlds didn't arm themselves. And worlds did not broadcast warnings. New data arrived. Weapon signatures. Ancient. Illegal. Forgotten for a reason. Graviton lances capable of collapsing space itself. Stellar compression arrays designed to ignite or extinguish stars. Dimensional fracture cores, theoretical weapons that had been banned before they were ever fully understood. Every single one active. Every single one ready. Elder Viral exhaled slowly. They built a Titan. As if responding to the words, the transmission shifted. The human stepped slightly aside. Just enough. Just enough for the full shape behind them to become visible. The Titan. It didn't float in space. It occupied it. Like reality itself had been forced to make room. Then beneath the original message, new text appeared. Untranslated. Unfiltered. Yet somehow understood by every being in the chamber. We are no longer hiding. No threat. No hostility. But something far more dangerous. Certainty. The transmission ended abruptly. The hologram collapsed into silence. No one spoke. No one moved. Because in that moment, every member of the Galactic Council realized the same thing. Humanity had not been discovered at the edge of the galaxy. They had been waiting there. Watching. Growing. Preparing. And whatever they had become. It was not something the Council had ever planned for. Far beyond the silent boundary. Something shifted. And deep within that impossible structure, something else woke up. The decision to send a reconnaissance fleet came faster than any formal vote. Fear had a way of accelerating politics. 37 vessels were selected, each one among the most advanced the Galactic Council possessed. Stealth cruisers, phase shift capable, layered in quantum cloaking that rendered them invisible across nearly every known detection spectrum. If anything could approach the silent boundary undetected. It was this fleet. And yet, not a single captain felt confident. Captain Relm stood at the observation deck of the lead vessel, staring into the void ahead. The stars thinned unnaturally as they neared the boundary, their light bending in subtle, disorienting ways. "Status?" he asked. "Cloaking stable," his systems officer replied. "No emissions detected. We are effectively invisible." Relm nodded slowly. "Cross the boundary." The moment they did, everything changed. It wasn't immediate failure. Not an explosion. Not an attack. It was pressure. An invisible weight pressing against the hull, against the systems, against reality itself. "Report," Relm said sharply. "Instruments fluctuating." "No, not fluctuating, recalibrating on their own." "That's not possible." "I know, Captain, but it's happening." Displays flickered. Coordinates shifted by fractions, then corrected themselves. Time stamps desynchronized for less than a second before snapping back. It felt like the fleet had entered a space where the rules were being adjusted. "Hold formation," Relm ordered, though his voice had tightened. Then, they saw it. At first, it was just darkness. A distortion ahead, subtle, almost invisible. Then the stars around it began to curve. Not from gravity. From presence. Magnify forward view. The image expanded. And the fleet went silent. The Titan filled the void. It was larger than any projection had suggested, so vast that their sensors couldn't capture it all at once. Sections of it seemed to fade in and out, not cloaked, but simply too immense for their systems to fully process. Massive rings rotated slowly around a central core, each one containing landmasses, oceans, even weather patterns visible from space. Cities glowed across its surface, countless points of light forming networks that stretched beyond the horizon. Energy pulsed beneath it all, steady and rhythmic. Like a heartbeat. Relm felt his breath catch. "This isn't a warship," someone whispered over the comm. "No," Relm replied quietly, "it's something worse." Before anyone could respond, Every system on the ship went dark. Not shut down. Not destroyed. Just paused. For a single, endless second. There was nothing. No sound. No motion. No time. Then, the systems returned. All at once, alarms began to trigger, then abruptly silenced themselves. Readouts stabilized, and a new presence filled the bridge. A voice, calm, unmistakably human. "You shouldn't be here." Reln's blood ran cold. "Source," he demanded. "No signal detected," the communications officer said, panic rising in their tone. "It's not coming through any channel." The voice continued, unbothered. "You crossed a boundary that was clearly marked." Reln forced himself to stand straighter. "We are representatives of the Galactic Council," he said, projecting authority he didn't feel. "We seek." The stars outside the viewport flickered. Just for a moment. Then, they changed. The Titan vanished. The fleet vanished, replaced by something else entirely. Fire. Ships, thousands of them, burning in silent explosions. Planets collapsing inward, their surfaces fracturing as gravity twisted them into nothingness. Entire star systems blinking out like extinguished lights. And at the center of it all, the Titan, unmoving, unstoppable. Reln staggered back slightly, gripping the console. "What is this?" someone gasped. "A simulation," another whispered. "No," Reln said, his voice hollow. "It's a message." As suddenly as it began, it ended. Reality snapped back into place. The Titan stood before them once more, unchanged, silent. The voice returned. "You've seen what we're capable of. No anger. No pride. Just fact." A pause followed, long enough for the weight of those words to settle. Then, "Now decide what you want to be." The connection ended. No signal cut. No system disengaged. It simply stopped. Reln looked around his bridge. His crew was frozen. Not from orders. From understanding. They hadn't been attacked. They hadn't even been targeted. They had been judged. And allowed to leave. "Turn us around," Reln said quietly. No one argued. As the fleet began its retreat, Reln couldn't shake the feeling pressing at the back of his mind. The Titan hadn't reacted to them like an intruder. Or an enemy. Or even a threat. It had reacted like something far more unsettling. Like a guardian observing something insignificant. And as they crossed back over the silent boundary, systems stabilizing instantly, one final realization settled into his thoughts. That voice, it hadn't sounded surprised to see them. It hadn't sounded curious. It hadn't even sounded cautious. It had sounded certain, as if this moment, this encounter, had always been expected. And far behind them, the Titan didn't move, but something within it shifted. Watching, waiting, and deciding. What came next, the reconnaissance fleet returned without damage. No casualties. No system failures. No physical evidence of attack. And yet, every single crew member carried the same report. They had been inside something that chose not to destroy them. That detail unsettled the Galactic Council more than any weapon ever could. The chamber filled faster than it had in centuries. Delegates overlapped in argument, their voices clashing in rising waves of panic. They infiltrated our systems without transmission. They projected false realities, entire star systems collapsing. "That wasn't projection," another countered sharply. "That was controlled perception manipulation. They made us experience it." Elder Viral raised a limb and slowly, reluctantly, the chamber quieted. "Captain Reln," he said, his tone measured, "state your conclusion." Reln stood at the center platform, posture rigid but eyes unsettled. "They could have destroyed us," he said. A murmur spread. They didn't, Viral replied. We are aware of that. Relm shook his head slightly. No, you're not understanding. It wasn't hesitation. It wasn't uncertainty. He paused. It was choice. Silence followed. They let us see what they could do, Relm continued, and then they let us leave. And your interpretation, Viral pressed. Relm's voice lowered. We were never in danger. That statement should have been reassuring. Instead, it sent a ripple of unease through every being present. Because if the fleet had never been in danger, then the Titan had never needed to act. Which meant nothing they had brought mattered. A signal interrupted the chamber. No alert preceded it. No system detected its arrival. It simply appeared. Every screen, every device, every personal interface. Activated simultaneously. A human stood there again. Different individual. Same composure. Same impossible calm. No armor, no insignia. Just presence. We know who you are. The chamber froze. Security protocols triggered automatically. Firewalls, signal blockers, isolation fields. None of them worked. The transmission continued uninterrupted. We know you observed us. Images flashed behind the human. Ancient probes hidden in human space. Covert surveillance satellites. Records of classified observation missions. All of it data that had been sealed beyond even most council members' clearance. Exposed. We know you categorized us. More images. Psychological profiles. Threat assessments. Documents labeling humanity as volatile, fragmented, containable. A few delegates visibly recoiled. The human took a step forward. Not aggressive, but deliberate. And we know what you did to the others. The images changed again. Entire species marked, studied, then erased. Civilizations deemed unstable, quietly removed from existence. Planets sterilized. Histories rewritten. A low collective tension spread through the chamber. Those records were not just classified. They were buried. The human's gaze didn't waver. You called it balance. A pause. We call it something else. No accusation followed. No emotional outburst. Just quiet judgment. Elder Viral leaned forward. What do you want? He demanded. For the first time, the human smiled. Not warmly. Not cruelly. Just knowingly. We wanted to understand. The chamber remained silent. So we studied you the way you studied us. More data appeared, far more detailed than anything the Council had ever gathered. Military structures. Political divisions. Hidden factions. Even internal disagreements within the Council itself. Nothing had been missed. Nothing had been overlooked. We learned from your history. The Titan appeared behind the human again. This time closer. Larger. Its surface pulsing faintly with contained energy. We prepared for it. Suddenly, every star visible through the chamber's panoramic viewports dimmed. Not extinguished. Not blocked. Dimmed. As if something had reached out and adjusted the brightness of reality itself. Gravitational readings spiked across every system. Time synchronization flickered for less than a second. Then, everything returned to normal. Gasps echoed through the chamber. The human's voice remained steady. We don't want war. The words hung there. Heavy, almost impossible to believe. Because nothing about what they had seen suggested limitation. Or fear. Or restraint born from weakness. Only restraint born from control. A long silence followed. Then, but we are done being prey. The transmission ended instantly. No fade. No signal loss. Just absence. The chamber remained frozen. No one spoke. No one moved. Because every being present understood the truth at the same time. Humanity hadn't just caught up to the galaxy. They had surpassed it. Quietly, completely, and far beyond the Council's reach. Within the depths of the Titan, entire systems began to shift. Energy flows redirected. Massive internal structures awakened. Not in response to threat, not in preparation for attack, but in alignment with something far more unsettling. A decision, and whatever humanity had just decided. The galaxy would feel it next. For the first time in its recorded history, the Galactic Council authorized a full archive breach. Not a limited release. Not a filtered disclosure. Everything. Sealed vaults opened. Blacklisted records resurfaced. Entire timelines, once erased, were restored in raw, unedited form. Data streams flooded into the chamber, forming vast layers of history suspended in holographic light. What emerged was not clarity. It was something far worse. Recognition. Search parameters, Elder Viral ordered, his voice tighter than before. Humanity, first contact, observation logs. The system hesitated for a fraction of a second, then complied. Files appeared. Ancient. Time-stamped long before most current council members had even existed. A junior archivist stepped forward, scanning rapidly. Initial classification, emerging species, rapid technological growth, high conflict ratio. Recommendation, Viral asked. The archivist paused. Then read aloud. Monitor closely. Potential long-term threat. Do not interfere unless necessary. Murmurs spread. That's standard, one delegate muttered. We've classified dozens of species the same way. Yes, Viral replied quietly, but we don't ignore them forever. More files surfaced. Decades of surveillance. Centuries. Humanity advancing faster than projections suggested, recovering from global conflicts, expanding into space sooner than predicted. Why was no containment protocol initiated? Another delegate demanded. The system responded before anyone else could. A new set of files unlocked. Restricted beyond standard authority. Even Viral hesitated before accessing them. Override, he said. The data opened, and the chamber fell silent. A faction, internal, high-ranking, influential. They had intervened. A recorded debate began to play. They are unstable, one voice argued. They will destroy themselves or others. Or they will evolve, another countered. They adapt faster than any species we've observed. That makes them dangerous. That makes them valuable. The discussion escalated, measured but tense. We should guide them, the second voice insisted, carefully, quietly. Interference violates council law. So does preemptive extinction, came the cold reply. The recording ended abruptly. A new file replaced it. Status update. Faction designation dissolved. Members missing. No explanation. No follow-up. Just absence. They disappeared, the archivist whispered. No, Viral said slowly, his gaze fixed on the data. They were removed. By whom, someone asked. No one answered. Because the next set of data made the question irrelevant. Cross-reference Titan architecture, Viral ordered. The system processed instantly. Comparisons appeared. Structural design. Energy flow patterns. Core stabilization matrices. Every single one. Matched. The chamber erupted. That's impossible. They couldn't have. They didn't just interfere, Viral said, cutting through the noise. They defected. Silence crashed down again. Because that meant the most advanced minds within the council hadn't simply guided humanity. They had joined them, given them access, shared knowledge that had been forbidden for millions of cycles. Weapons, systems, theories that had never been fully realized. All of it transferred. Why, a delegate asked, their voice unsteady. No one had an answer. Until another signal appeared. This one unstable, corrupted, old. Unlike the previous transmissions, this one struggled to hold form. The image flickered violently as it stabilized. A member of the lost faction appeared. Their form was damaged, fractured light, inconsistent resolution. Behind them, chaos. Alarms, structural collapse, fire tearing through unseen systems. The recording was not meant for the Council. It was a message left behind. If you're seeing this, then we were too late. The chamber leaned forward as one. We tried to guide them, limit the exposure, control the pace. The figure coughed, glitching mid-motion. But they didn't follow projections. Explosions flashed behind them. The structure around them began to fail. They adapted faster than we could understand. Every system we introduced, they improved. The signal warped, nearly collapsing. We thought we were teaching them. A long pause. Static surged. Then, we were accelerating them. The chamber held its breath. We didn't uplift them. The final words came through, barely intact. We unleashed them. The transmission died. Completely. No trace remained. No recoverable data. Just silence. For several long moments, no one in the chamber spoke. Because the implication was unavoidable. Humanity wasn't just powerful. They were unexpected, unpredictable, uncontrolled. A species that had taken everything they were given and gone far beyond it. Then, the sensors activated, simultaneously, across every system connected to the Council network. Alerts flooded in faster than they could be processed. Multiple signatures detected, unknown origin. Scale readings impossible. Locations spread across the outer sectors. Viral turned sharply, display. The hologram expanded. Dots appeared across the galaxy map. Then more. Then more. Each one massive. Each one identical in signature. Each one a titan. Dozens. Then hundreds. Hidden in regions long considered empty. Dormant zones. Dead space. Places no one had ever bothered to look twice. They've been there this whole time, someone whispered. Viral stared at the map, something cold settling in his core. No, he said quietly. They weren't there. A pause. They were being built. The dots began to move. Slowly, deliberately, not toward random targets. Toward positions. Strategic. Precise. Encircling. And in that moment, the Council understood the truth they had been too late to stop. This wasn't a first contact. This wasn't even a warning. This was the end of something old, and the beginning of something entirely new. Because humanity hadn't just prepared for the galaxy. They had positioned themselves to control it. At first, the Council thought it was a sensor failure. Too many signals, too many mass readings appearing at once, entire sectors lighting up with impossible data. It overwhelmed even their most advanced systems. But it wasn't an error. It was a revelation. The galaxy map stabilized, and what it showed was undeniable. Titans. Not one, not 10. Hundreds. Each one positioned with terrifying precision across key regions of space. Trade corridors, energy hubs, strategic junctions, even uninhabited systems that until now had seemed irrelevant. Nothing about their placement was random. It was calculated. Perfectly. They're not invading, one strategist whispered, scanning the patterns. They're aligning. Elder Viral didn't respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the shifting map as the Titans began to move, not quickly, not aggressively, but with quiet, unstoppable purpose. Track their vectors, he ordered. The system complied. Lines appeared. Intersecting. Overlapping. Encircling. A cold realization spread through the chamber. They're forming a network, the analyst said, voice tightening. A complete coverage grid. For what? Someone demanded. No one answered. Because deep down, they already knew. Control. Absolute. Without firing a single shot. Then, every system in the chamber flickered. Lights dimmed, interfaces froze. And a new signal surged across the entire network. Not forced. Not invasive. It didn't break through defenses. It simply was accepted. A transmission unlike anything they had ever encountered. Not one voice. Billions. Layered together in perfect synchronization. Human. Unified. We remember. The words resonated not just through speakers but through thought itself. Not painful, not overwhelming, but impossible to ignore. Images followed. Not projections. Experiences. The council didn't just see them. They felt them. Worlds torn apart by war. Human cities burning under their own conflicts. Plagues sweeping across populations. Desperation, fear, loss. And something else. Endurance. Relentless. Unyielding. We endured. The images shifted. Humanity rebuilding. Adapting. Surviving against impossible odds again and again. Technological leaps made not in comfort, but in crisis. Innovation driven by necessity, not luxury. We learned. The Titans moved again. The map updated in real time. Positions locking into place. Perfect symmetry. Every critical system in the galaxy now within reach. Not surrounded. Not trapped. But monitored. They're not cutting us off, a delegate said slowly. They're making sure we can't move without them knowing. Viral's voice was quiet. Not knowing, he said. Allowing. The transmission continued. We adapted. More images. Humanity reaching beyond their system. Expanding. Not chaotically, but with purpose. With restraint. Every step measured. Every mistake studied. Corrected. Improved. We became something new. The council felt it then. Not fear of destruction, but fear of understanding. Because everything they were seeing, everything humanity had become. It made sense. Too much sense. A species shaped by constant struggle. By internal conflict. By survival against its own nature. That kind of species didn't just grow stronger. It grew smarter. More aware. More prepared. And far more dangerous than anything built in peace. The transmission shifted one final time. The billions of voices faded, leaving a single one. The same calm tone. The same steady presence. We are not here to conquer. The Titans held position. Silent. Watching. We are here to ensure something never happens again. The council didn't need to ask what that meant. They had seen the archives. The purges. The silent extinctions. The control. A long pause followed. Then, you built a system based on fear. No accusation. Just truth. We built something stronger. The map zoomed out. The full scale of the Titan network became visible. Every major region touched. Every pathway accounted for. No gaps. No weaknesses. Now you will live with it. The transmission ended. Not abruptly, but completely. Like a door closing, leaving no trace behind. Silence filled the chamber. Not chaotic. Not panicked. Just heavy. Because for the first time, the council understood their position. They were not being attacked. They were not being threatened. They were being contained. Not as prisoners, but as variables. Inside a system they no longer controlled. Elder Viral exhaled slowly, his gaze still locked on the map. They've already won, he said quietly. No one argued, because deep down, they all felt it. This wasn't the beginning of a war. It was the end of an era. And humanity hadn't taken the galaxy by force. They had taken it by understanding it better than anyone else ever had. And far beyond the Council's reach, within every Titan, something synchronized, a network coming fully online, not preparing for battle, not anticipating resistance, but maintaining something far more complex. Balance on humanity's terms. And if that balance was ever threatened, the Council now knew exactly what would happen next. Not everyone accepted it. For all the fear gripping the Galactic Council, there were still those who believed power could be challenged, who believed humanity's restraint was weakness, or worse, a bluff. They called themselves the Continuance Directive. An old faction, quiet, ruthless, responsible for many of the Council's darkest decisions now exposed for all to see. To them, humanity wasn't a superior force. It was a mistake, and mistakes could be corrected. "We strike now," their leader declared in a secured channel hidden even from most Council systems. "Before they tighten control, before they decide we're unnecessary." "They've surrounded every major system," another voice warned. "We don't even know how their weapons function." "Then we learn," the leader replied coldly, "by forcing them to use them." The plan was simple, brutal, a concentrated multi-vector assault targeting a single Titan positioned near a relatively uninhabited sector. Enough firepower to erase a star system, enough to force a response. Not a test, a provocation, and if humanity retaliated, the directive would escalate. If they didn't, then the myth of the Titans would collapse. The strike launched without warning. Hundreds of ships emerged from concealed positions, weapons charging simultaneously. Energy levels spiked beyond safe limits as they prepared to release everything they had in a single, overwhelming barrage. Fire. The void lit up. Beams of compressed stellar energy tore through space, converging on the Titan. Graviton distortions followed, warping the fabric of reality around the target. For a brief, blinding moment, the Titan disappeared, consumed in a storm of destructive force. Across the galaxy, sensors flared as the energy wave rippled outward. Even within the Council chamber, systems struggled to process the scale of the attack. "They actually did it," someone whispered, disbelief mixing with dread. "Track the Titan," Viral ordered sharply. The data lagged. Just for a second. Then, it returned, and what it showed stopped every thought in the room. The Titan was still there. Unchanged. Not damaged. Not weakened. Not even moved. The energy, every last fragment of it, was gone. Not deflected. Not dispersed. Absorbed. How a delegate choked, unable to finish the question. No answer came, because something else had already begun. The Titan moved. Not dramatically. Not aggressively. Just slightly, as if adjusting its position by a fraction. Then, a single point of light formed along its surface. Small, insignificant compared to its size, but focused, precise. "Energy spike detected," the systems officer said, voice trembling. "Minimal output, but no, that's not possible." "Report," Viral demanded. "It's not scaling like a conventional weapon," they replied. "It's selective." The light vanished. No beam. No visible discharge. Nothing crossed the distance between the Titan and the attacking fleet. And yet, the fleet disappeared. Not exploded. Not scattered. Gone. Every ship. Every signal. Every trace of matter. Erased so completely that even the space they had occupied seemed untouched. As if they had never existed at all. Silence followed. Absolute. Crushing. The kind of silence that didn't invite questions. Because it had already answered them. Across the galaxy, Every sensor network searched for residual data. There was none. No debris. No radiation. No distortion. Nothing. They're not destroyed, one analyst said weakly. There's no evidence of destruction. Viral's voice was barely audible. Because destruction leaves something behind. A transmission activated. Not forceful. Not invasive. Just present. The same human voice. Calm. Unchanged. That was your warning. No anger. No escalation. Just finality. We will not be attacked again. The message echoed across every system, every world, every mind capable of receiving it. And this time, there was no misinterpretation. No debate. No denial. The line had been drawn. And crossing it didn't lead to war. It didn't lead to retaliation. It led to something far more terrifying. Non-existence. The transmission ended. The Titan returned to stillness. As if nothing had happened. As if it had never needed to act in the first place. Back in the council chamber, no one spoke. Because every being present felt it. That shift. That irreversible change in understanding. Humanity hadn't just demonstrated power. They had demonstrated precision. Control beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. The ability to remove a threat. Without collateral. Without consequence. Without leaving even a memory behind. Elder Viral closed his eyes briefly. They didn't destroy them, he said quietly. They corrected an error. No one disagreed. Because deep down, they all understood the truth now. This wasn't a war they could fight. It wasn't even a war they could survive. It was a system they had already lost control of. And humanity was the one maintaining it, with absolute authority, and no margin for mistake. No alarms sounded across the galaxy after the erasure. No retaliatory fleets mobilized. No desperate countermeasures were launched. Because there was nothing left to respond to. The continuance directive had vanished so completely that even their existence began to feel uncertain, like a half-remembered thought dissolving at the edge of awareness. And that was the most terrifying part. Not the power, not the precision, but the implication. If humanity could erase something so completely, what else could they remove? What else had they already chosen not to? The Galactic Council convened again, not in chaos this time, but in a heavy, suffocating quiet. The chamber felt smaller somehow, its vast expanse now overshadowed by the invisible presence of the Titans positioned across the stars. Elder Viral stood at the center platform, but he didn't call for order. He didn't need to. No one spoke. Because for the first time in their history, the council had nothing left to argue about. They're waiting, one delegate said finally, their voice thin. For what? Another asked, though the answer already hung in the air. Viral looked up at the galaxy map. The Titans hadn't moved. Not since the erasure. Every one of them held position with perfect stillness, forming a silent network of control that no one could challenge. They're waiting for us, he said. A transmission appeared. No surge. No breach. Just presence. The human stood there again. The same calm figure. Unarmed. Unmoved. Unimpressed. Behind them, the Titan stretched into infinity, its scale almost impossible to comprehend, its surface alive with motion that hinted at billions of lives existing within. The human didn't speak immediately. They simply looked at the council, as if measuring something. Then, we are not your enemies. The words landed differently this time. Not as reassurance, but as a boundary, a definition. One the council now understood carried absolute weight. But we will not be controlled. No challenge followed. No escalation. Just truth. Viral stepped forward, his voice steady despite the weight pressing down on him. You already control everything that matters, he said. Trade routes, strategic systems, movement across the galaxy. A slight pause. What more do you want? The human's expression didn't change. Understanding. The chamber shifted uneasily. That is not something enforced with Titans, one delegate muttered. The human's gaze flicked toward them. Not hostile, but sharp. No, they said quietly, it is. A moment of silence followed. Then, that's why this is your choice. The words echoed. Choice, a concept the Council had used for countless civilizations before them. A word that had often meant compliance, disguised as freedom. Now it was being returned. Unfiltered, uncontrolled. You can continue as you were, the human continued. Operating in secrecy, eliminating what you fear, maintaining balance through silence. Images flickered briefly behind them. The archives, the purges, the hidden extinctions. Or you can change. The Titan behind them shifted, subtle but noticeable. Not threatening, but present. We will not interfere with your internal systems. A pause. Unless you cross the line again. No one questioned what that meant. They had already seen it. Felt it. Understood it. Viral stepped closer to the projection. And if we refuse, he asked. The human met his gaze directly. Then nothing changes. A ripple of confusion moved through the chamber. That's it, someone said. No ultimatum, no enforcement. The human's expression remained steady. You misunderstand. A beat. We don't need to enforce anything. The weight of that statement settled slowly. Heavier than any threat. Because it meant humanity wasn't seeking permission. They weren't negotiating from a position of uncertainty. They had already established the system, already defined the boundaries. The Council's decision only determined how they would exist within it. Silence stretched. Long, unbroken, because for the first time in their existence, the Galactic Council faced a choice that couldn't be manipulated, couldn't be hidden, couldn't be undone. Viral looked around the chamber, at the delegates, at the beings who had shaped the galaxy for millions of cycles. And for the first time, they looked uncertain, not about strategy, not about power, but about themselves. The human spoke one final time. We're not asking you to trust us. A pause. We're asking you to decide who you are when you no longer have control. The transmission ended. The chamber went dark. And the decision, the one no one wanted to make, hung in the silence. Because deep down, every member of the Council understood the truth. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about identity. And whatever they chose next would define the future of the entire galaxy. Under the watchful silence of something that no longer needed to prove anything. Only to act. If they made the wrong choice, the decision did not come quickly. For the first time in its existence, the Galactic Council delayed action, not out of indecision, but out of something far more unfamiliar. Reflection. No votes were rushed, no factions argued for dominance, no hidden alliances formed in the shadows. Because for once, there was no advantage to gain. Only a truth to face. Across the chamber, delegates reviewed the same data over and over again. The Titans, the erased fleet, the archives of their own past, the countless moments where they had chosen control over understanding. And now, that choice had come back to them. Elder Viral stood alone at the center for a long time, watching the galaxy map. The Titans hadn't moved. Not a single one. They didn't need to. Their presence was enough. They're not pressuring us, one delegate said quietly from the edge of the chamber. No, Viral replied. They don't need to. Another spoke, hesitant. If we accept, what does that make us? The question lingered. Not rhetorical. Not philosophical. Real, because acceptance meant more than survival. It meant change, and the council had not changed in millions of cycles. Viral finally turned to face them. "It makes us accountable," he said. Silence followed. Then, slowly, one by one, delegates began to stand down. Weapons authorizations were revoked. Fleet commands were recalled. Suppression protocols, those silent systems used to correct unstable civilizations, were deactivated. For the first time in recorded history, the Council chose restraint, not because they were forced to, but because they understood the cost of not doing so. "Transmit our response," Viral ordered. The message was simple, clear, unhidden. "We acknowledge your position." A pause. "We will not resist it." Another pause. "And we will change." The transmission was sent. No encryption. No protection. Just truth. The galaxy waited. For retaliation. For domination. For something. But what came next was nothing. No response. No movement. The Titans remained exactly where they were. Silent. Watching. Days passed. Then cycles. Still nothing. At first, it unsettled the Council. They had expected confirmation. Some acknowledgement. But none came. Until, quietly, without announcement, something changed. Trade routes reopened. Not forcibly. Not under command. But naturally. Systems that had once operated in isolation began to reconnect. Not because they were told to, but because they felt safe enough to try. Old borders lost their meaning. Not erased, just irrelevant. And the Titans, they stayed, unmoving, unthreatening, yet undeniably present. A constant reminder, not of fear, but of consequence. Elder Viral stood once more before the galaxy map, now calmer than it had been in ages. "Status," he asked. "No hostile activity," an analyst replied. "No interference, no new transmissions." Viral nodded slowly. "They're not governing us," the analyst added. "They're observing." "Yes," Viral said quietly. "That's what we used to call it." A faint ripple of understanding moved through the chamber. The difference now was that they were the ones being observed. And for the first time, they were aware of it. Another delegate stepped forward. "What happens if we fail?" they asked. No one answered immediately, because the answer didn't need to be spoken. They had already seen it, felt it, understood it. Viral looked out at the distant markers representing the Titans. Endless, unyielding, silent. "We won't," he said. Not with confidence, not with certainty, but with something far more fragile. Intent, because that was all they had left. And perhaps, all they needed. Far beyond the Council's reach. Within the depths of the Titan network. Data flowed. Patterns shifted. Observations updated. Not as commands. Not as control. But as something far more complex. Evaluation. Humanity watched the galaxy, not as rulers, not as conquerors, but as guardians of a balance they had chosen to enforce only when necessary. A balance shaped by everything they had endured, everything they had learned, and everything they had refused to become. Back in the chamber, Viral spoke one final time. "We feared their power," he said. A long pause followed. But that was never the danger. The delegates listened. Because now, they understood. We should have feared their restraint. Silence settled across the chamber. Not heavy, not oppressive, but peaceful. Because for the first time, fear was no longer driving the galaxy forward. Understanding was. And far among the stars, the Titans remained, still, patient, watching, not as a threat, but as a promise, because if that understanding ever faded, if the galaxy ever returned to what it once was, then the silence they had all come to fear would not be a warning. It would be the end. And nothing, not memory, not history, not even the stars themselves, would remain to remember what had been lost. Only silence, absolute, eternal, and deserved.